Shalom Aleichem and welcome back everyone as we tonight again have the privilege of preparing for Shabbat Kodesh, this week being Parashat Chayei Sara. Chayei Sara, everybody knows this Parashat is a Parasha about Shidduchim, a Parasha about Amen, a Parasha about marriage. Avraham and Sara passes away, and Avraham looks for a shidduch for Yitzchak, and they find Rivka. So I would like to start off tonight's shir, Be'ezrat Hashem, talking a little bit about marriage and how we learn from our parasha what it is, a real marriage from Hashem. We'll start off with a story. The story we've said a few times in the past. There was a Ben Torah, there was a Jewish boy, not young, but a boy of marriageable age in yeshiva, and he looking to get married, and he comes to the shadchan and he tells the shadchan, I'm looking for a girl, but I want the worst girl ever. I want the one who's going to give me a miserable life. Yeah. Shadchan says, no one asks me like this. Everybody says, give me the best, and you ask me for the worst. Right. So he says, Chazal say that if you have a very bad wife, you'll go straight to Gan Eden. You go straight to Olam Haba, no Gehenim. So the Shadchan says, okay, listen, it's a very strange request, but let's see what we can do. A few days later, the Shadchan calls this young boy back, and he tells him, listen, I found for you the girl you're looking for. She has the most terrible midot. She doesn't do hesed for anybody. She doesn't help anybody. She has a terrible temper. She smokes. She gambles. She's just terrible, terrible person. You want to go out with her? He says, yes. And he goes out with her, and he sees that she's really terrible. And he says, no, okay, I'll marry her, and then I'll know for sure I'll go to Gan Eden, I'll have a terrible life. And this way, he has kapara in this world, and he ends up in Gan Eden in the future. And, one date leads to the next. He keeps going out with her. Eventually, he asks her to marry her. And every time she's acting terribly on the dates. Finally, they get married. And he goes home with her. And as soon as they get home, she turns out to be the nicest girl in the world. She's helping him. Let me take off your shoes. Let me put them here. Let me take this. Let me do that. The morning she wakes up before him, she's already making breakfast, squeezing fresh orange juice, and she's cooking and frying everything up for him exactly how he likes it. She's talking very pleasantly. No, he thinks maybe it's the first night after the chuppah, first day after chuppah, maybe she's nice. The next night, the whole Sheva Brachot, the first month, a whole year goes by, and she's the most nicest person he's ever met. So he goes to the shadchan and he tells the shadchan, I don't understand. He says, I told you specifically I wanted the worst girl. She's the best girl ever. She's the best Eshet Hayel. Whoever found the better Eshet Hayel than this? The shadchan says, you're right. I can't believe it, but I don't know what to tell you. He says, this young boy says, this is not what I wanted. You better fix it. I need her to be really bad. I need her to be really bad to me. So the shadchan says, okay, I'll talk to her. I'll see what's going on. How she'd suddenly change. So the shadchan calls in this woman who's now married for a year to this guy. And he calls in the wife, and she comes in for an appointment. As soon as she walks into the shadchan's room, she puts her feet on the table, takes out a cigarette, starts smoking. And the shadchan says, now this is the lady that I know. This is who you are. How come at home you're not acting this way? And she says to the shadchan, she says, if that bum thinks he's going to get to Gan Eden because of me, he's going to use me to get into Gan Eden, he's got something else coming to him. The lesson of the story is that when a person has motivation to do something, that's enough for them to do it. You need to have a little inspiration, a little motivation, and you can do it. This woman, from being the worst, turned to be the best because she didn't want her husband to go to Gan Eden, so she became the nicest. The question is for us, that I hope to somewhat answer, our motivation be in our marriages? What should be our motivation to make our marriages the best that it can be? What should be our motivation? In this week's Parashat, we have Lavan and Betuel, the father and brother of Rivka Imenu, tell Eliezer as follows: Vaya'an Lavan uVetuel vayomeru. Right, this is chapter 24, Pasuk 50, Pasuk Nun. That Lavan and Betuel answered, vayomeru, and they said, MeHashem yatsa hadavar. This shidduch is from Hashem. The Rashba says, really, we don't like to quote Rishaim. Lavan and Betuel, Rivka's father and brother, were not very good people. And yet, the Rashba says, the Torah says this in their name, and comments for all of the history. We say, and this is something that we always say, the shidduch happened from Hashem. They said a truth, and we keep it as. We quote in a positive manner. The Torah quotes their comment because it rings true. Me'Hashem yatsa davar is what we call basheret, someone's intended. We have to really, really understand that our spouse is our intended, is the one that Hashem put for us. There's a famous midrash, Chachamim always share this with us. This midrash is in Vayikra Rabbah. The midrash says there was once a princess that asked Rabbi Yossi Bar Chalafta, in how many days did Hashem make the world? Rabbi Yossi said, it says in Pasuk, Kisheshet Yamim Asa Hashem et Hashemayim et Haaretz. Hashem created the world in 6 days. So this very smart princess said, so what has God been doing since the 6 days? So Rabbi Yossi answered her, oh, you want to know what God's been doing since the 6 days of creation? He's been making shidduchim. He's been saying, Bat Ploni le Ploni, the daughter of this one to that one. So she says, this princess says to Rabbi Yossi, this is what God's been so busy with, making shidduchim? I can make shidduchim. Anyone can make shidduchim. Put her pants with the skirt, and that's it. You got a shidduch. And unfortunately, some shadchanim work that way. And she says, I'll make you shidduch. She says, I have here 1,000 servants. I have here 1,000 maid servants. And she said, everyone, you're married to this one, you're married to that one, that one, to that. You're all married now. She sent them all home, gave them all apartments. And what happens? The next morning, they all come back to the princess. One guy has his skull cracked. Another one has his eye knocked out of his socket. One has his arm broken. Another one said, I'll give everything back. I don't need anything. Just let me get out of here. She calls to Rabbi Yossi. The princess calls to Rabbi Yossi. And she says, your Torah is true. Everything you said is true. And Rabbi Yossi answers to her, didn't I tell you, it may seem easy to you to make shidduchim, but for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's called as hard as Kriyat Yam Suf. The truth is, as much as the world wants to deny it, as much as people want to think it's not, men and women are entirely different species. Right? We think different, act different, talk different, behave differently. The fact that two people so different can live together, that's what the Pasuk says, Mehashem yatsa davar. This is only from God. Because if it's not the right shidduch, there is no way that these two people can live together. That's the first thing we have to put into our minds. But The Pininim ala Torah says in even further. A person who comes in understanding that his spouse, Hashem gave him, then he is playing a leading role in God's plan. That means Hashem has a plan in this world, right? And the plan was for you to be with your spouse. You are the leading star and role in that play and that plan. And a person has to approach that. He has to approach his marriage, his relationship, knowing that this is Hashem's plan for him to be together. Under the chuppah, and throughout the 7 days of Sheva Brachot, what is one of the first brachot we say in the Sheva Brachot? Sha'akol bara lichvodo. What does that mean?
Everything was built for his.
Everything was created for God's glory. Now, is there a talk about the Hatan in that bracha? Is there a talk about the Kala? There's no mention about Kala. Later on, they bring it down. But the first bracha has nothing to do with Hatan or Kala. It just says, Sha'akol bara lichvodo. Everything was created for Hashem's honor and glory. Why would that be the first bracha?
We are the example
Say better.
of how should be.
That tells you what your marriage is supposed to be. Sha'akol bara lichvodo. Your marriage is supposed to be everything for Hashem's glory. You see, a lot of young guys are going in, they're thinking they need to get the most prettiest girl because what everyone's going to say, I have to have the best model of everything. But they don't understand that self-gratification is not the point of marriage. The point of marriage is Sha'akol bara lichvodo. Everything was created for Hashem's honor. That means that whatever happens in our relationship, which we already know is Ma'ashem Yatsa Davar, is God's plan, now has to be oriented and looked for God's glory. How many fights this would take away if people would think this way? Because instead of thinking about me, or thinking about, she's thinking about her, we're both thinking about the same objective. How do we lead a life that brings glory to Hashem? This is what it means, Ki Ma'ashem Yatsa Davar. That we have to do Sha'akol bara lichvodo. How I treat her is part of my avodat Hashem. And how she treats you, that's part of avodat Hashem because Hashem put you two together. This is already a whole different way of looking at marriage. Of understanding it's from God, that it's part of my service. We know that the whole point, institution of marriage was to better a person. Chaim Vital talks about this. A person is supposed to work in his midot through his marriage. And you, with your wife, relationship is a service of God and in the glory of God and in the honor of Hashem. Rabbi Yisachar Fran, Shlito, brings two stories to illustrate this idea. Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky, Zecher Tzadik Lebracha, he was at a wedding in Williamsburg and he needed a ride back to Muncie. And so, imagine Rosh Hashiva needs a ride. Many people will offer a ride. Right? Who doesn't want to ride? We have a schus to drive Rosh Hashiva up to Muncie, a 2-hour drive, whatever it is, and can talk to the Rosh Hashiva. So one person said, I can give the Rosh Hashiva a ride. So the Rosh Hashiva, Rabbi Yaakov, said to him, can I see your car? So the young man was a little bit taken aback. She was going to check out my car. What model? What's this? What that? So he says, yeah. He says, I need to see your car. So he takes him to the parking lot where the car is parked. And he shows him, this is my car. So Yaakov says, open it up. He just opens it. Yaakov goes to the back seat. Sits down. He sits for a minute or two. He comes out. He says, okay, I can take a ride in this car. So the young man is a little bit puzzled. Mr. Shiva was going in the back, checking out the car. What is he doing? So Rabbi Yaakov sees this young man's a little puzzled. So he says to him, he says, I see you have a puzzling look, so I'll explain it to you. He says, I'm coming with my wife. My wife and I are going to be traveling back with you. I had to make sure that the back seat was comfortable, so when my wife sits there, she would be comfortable. He didn't come to check out which model car he has, or what he's got inside. He came to check if it would be comfortable for his wife. Zeh avodat Hashem. This is the work, it's service of Hashem in the glory for the glory of Hashem. It's a different way of thinking of it. You know, unfortunately, we live where we live, and the American society, no matter how much you want to or think you're pushing it out, it seeps in. And what the Goyim think about marriage and what it is, unfortunately, it creeps into us. That's why it's so important to learn our original sources to understand what it's supposed to be. There's another story that a friend brings down, and this happened with the Milwaukee Rebbe, Harav Yaakov Yisrael Twersky. Right before he was nifter, he was diagnosed with Yenamalcha, with terrible disease, and it was found in the very late stages. And the doctors were talking to the Rebbe, and his son was there as well, his son Rav Avram, who was also a doctor, Rav Avram J. Twersky. And the doctors were talking, and they said, from what we see, there is no real chance for you to survive. If we give you chemotherapy, maybe you'll get 2 more months, but you're gonna expire really soon. And the Rebbe was talking to his son, and the Rebbe said, you know what? I'm already in a lot of pain, and this therapy is not going to really help. It's just going to prolong my pain. I'd rather not do the chemotherapy. When time will come, that'll be it. And his son agreed with the father, and that was the plan that we're going to do. While this conversation was going on, the Rebbitzin was in the hallway, and she met the doctor. And the doctor told her, we have some chemotherapy that maybe can prolong his life for about 8 weeks. And she tells the doctor, if we'll give my husband even a few extra days, we want it. The Rebbitzin came into the room, and she told her husband, this is all in front of the son who's watching all this. She told her husband that the doctor felt that chemotherapy would help for a few months, and she wants her husband, the Rebbe, to have it. She then walks out of the room, and the Rebbe turns to his son and says, I know I just told you I won't take it, and I told you it's going to prolong my pain, but now that your mother wants me to take it, I will take it even if it extends my pain. Why, he says? I don't want her to have survivor's guilt. That afterwards she'll think, only if I'd done more, if I insisted on the therapy, he would be alive. I rather her feel that she did everything she could for me. So this way, she won't feel any pain afterwards. That's a huge sacrifice. Selflessness. To endure 8 weeks of chemotherapy, which is not easy for a man who's already in so much pain. Yet, his wife said she wanted it, and he didn't want her to feel afterwards feelings of guilt. He went ahead and did it. It's a real different way of looking at marriage. Hopefully this explains somewhat our question that we started with. What should be our motivation for a good marriage? The motivation is supposed to be that this marriage came from Hashem, and it was created for one purpose only. Created for the honor of Hashem. Let's move on to our second lesson in this week's Parashat. We're going to back up in the Parashat. We talked about marriage. We'll back up to the incident that's found right in the beginning of the Parashat. Abraham Avinu, he is coming back from the Akedah. He comes home and he finds that his wife passed away. Now, according to most Rishonim, the final test was the Akedah. Avram had 10 tests, like the Pirkei Avot says. Most Rishonim say that the final test was the Akedah. However, Rabbeinu Yonah says that the final test, the most hardest test, the final test of the 10 tests, was the test that when Avraham Avinu came home and he found that his wife Sara was nifteret, that she passed away. That was the hardest test that Avraham had. Now, I'm not one to judge one test over the other, to say which one's harder or not. But in a sense, think about it for a second. Akedah, Yitzchak is what? 37? Right? And he was supposed to kill him, and that was supposed to be the continuity of the Klal Yisrael. Whereas Sarah is 127. People died at 127, even back then. She lived a long life. Maybe the test, in some sense, maybe it's not that. Akedah should be the highest test. But Rabbeinu Yonah says the hardest test was this test. And he counts this as the 10th.
Because it was unexpected.
So the Michtav Milio, Rav Dessler, explains there were two things that were going on in this episode with Avraham coming home, finding Sarah and burying Sarah, that made it the hardest test ever. He says, first thing first, who is Avraham dealing with in this whole episode? This man named Ephron. Okay, now if you had to picture Ephron, how would you picture him? So I'll give you a picture for him.
Slick guy.
Slick, sleazy dude. You know, the used car salesman. He's ready to sell you the Brooklyn Bridge for the highest price ever. Right? This guy will sell you anything and he'll jack up the price. And you know it's not worth it. And yet he's going to keep bringing it. This is Ephron. Okay, this is the guy Avraham Avinu has to deal with. How do we deal with people? Now, I can't say that I'm innocent from this, but I try to keep it in mind. How do we deal with people who, give us a bad attitude sometimes? We give them back the bad attitude. And you're trying to rip me off. I'll try to rip you off. It's just sometimes a normal thing to do. Okay. Now, let's now deal with another aspect of the situation that Michtav Milio says. Now Avraham has to deal with this used car salesman, right? This sleazy car salesman over here. And at the same time, think about where Avram's coming from. Think where Avram's coming from. Avram just came home to an unexpected event. Sarah Imenu passed away. Remember, Abraham would megayer the men. Sarah was megayer the woman. They were a duo. They worked together. They brought Hashem. Everything was done together. Abraham and Sarah. Sarah unexpectedly died in front of Abraham.
She was like the mitzvot that married mitzvot.
Hold on. Now, what was going on here? Rav Fran gives an example. Rav Fran says that he was at a grocery store, and the grocery guy was bagging the food, and he started to put a lot of food in one bag. It's getting really heavy. The bag would rip. So Rav Fran says, "Can you please maybe split it into a second bag?" So this grocer said, "If you don't like the way I do it, you bag it yourself." So Rav Fran said, "Can you tell me what I said that made you go off like that?" So now the person says, "I'm sorry, I've had a bad day." Right? A lot of times we excuse our unpleasantness because we had a bad day. Something bad happened to us. It's a hard day. Imagine a person coming out of a flight, right? and then he's looking at the carousel of all the luggage is coming, and his luggage is not here. Right? What does he do? He goes over to the ticket agent, and he starts to scream, "Where's my luggage?" Doesn't even say hi, nothing. Right away. Unfortunately, I remember once I had to deal with one of these insurance agencies and for a claim, and they weren't processing it. And I called them, and I just started screaming because I was already upset that they weren't processing it. This was the situation Avraham Avinu was coming from. Imagine a person's in the hospital, right? A patient, a family member's in the hospital, and something's going on there. The person's emotions run, and they start screaming. This is something I learned as a nurse on the hospital floors. A lot of times when family screams, they're screaming not because they're upset with you, they're upset with the situation. The family members in the hospital, they didn't expect that to happen. If you're able to understand them when they're screaming at you, they're not really screaming at you, but they're screaming because of where they're coming from. It's much easier to deal with that situation. You're not taking it personal anymore. But people scream because they're in a bad situation. They're coming from a bad situation. And all these emotions are perfectly legitimate in our eyes. Right? It makes sense. You're going in a bad situation. Now, let's go back to Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu just came back from the Akedah. His son narrowly escaped this experience. He comes home, he's drained of emotion. He just had a hard day. Right? Yitzhak almost was nifter. He was almost killed by him. And, just a hard day. He came home drained. He comes home and he finds Sara dead. His wife of his youth, the person who did everything with him, gone. And now he has to go and deal with Ephraim. He's coming from a terrible experience, and he's dealing with the worst kind of guy you can deal with. And yet, Avraham Avinu, Psukim, if you read it, he's bowing down to Bnei Het. With respect, he's talking to them. He's negotiating. And he's keeping his calm and his cool. The Michtav Melyahu says, this is why, according to Rabbeinu Yonah, this was the hardest test for Avraham Avinu. To keep collective, calm, and cool in situations where your emotion is already drained and you're dealing with the worst kind of people in the world, and yet you can maintain pleasantness. That was the hardest test. Treating people with derech eretz while under such personal stresses, that is the ultimate test, says Rav Dessler. And he says, Rav Dessler continues and he writes, over the years, it's become a matter of pride for people to not act with derech eretz, to act without derech eretz, who can be more, bossy and more disrespectful to people. And Rav Dessler writes how far we have fallen. On the nights Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach's Rebbetzin was nifter, he was standing in the hall of the hospital trying to deal with this grief. A Talmud of his, who was in the hospital as well, because his wife just gave birth, saw Rav Shlomo Zalman. Now, you see, a lot of times when you're in an emotional high or you have emotions running, you don't think, why is that person in the hospital? You just saw your Rebbe there, and so he runs over to his Rebbe Shlomo Zalman, and he said, Shlomo Zalman, give me a mazel tov. My wife just had a baby. And Shlomo Zalman goes ahead and gives him this huge mazel tov, hugs and kisses him. The Talmud walked away with his heart singing, completely unaware that his Rosh Yeshiva, just a few moments ago, lost his wife. Shlomo Zalman learned from Avraham Avinu that just because we're dealing with personal stresses doesn't mean we take away from someone else how we talk to them and how we deal with them. Now, I want to also bring down something very interesting about this episode from the Midrash. We know in the Torah there's no extra words. Everything in the Torah is written and teaches halachot. Yet, if you take a look at this week's parasha, how many times does it say Bnei Het? The children of Het, Ephron, Achiti. It says Bnei Het 9 times in our parasha. And then, once again, in Parashat Vayehi. 10 times. The Midrash Rabbah says, Rabbi Eliezer said, how much ink is spilled and how many quills are broken in order to write Bnei Het 10 times. And he says, the 10 times that it's written Bnei Het corresponds to the Aseret HaDibraot, to the 10 Commandments. The 10 Commandments, in order to teach us, whoever helps a tzaddik in his business, as if he fulfilled the Aseret HaDibraot. This is what Midrash says. The Midrash says that Bnei Het is mentioned 10 times because they fulfilled the Aseret HaDibraot by helping Abraham by the Marat Machpelah. Which I think, hearing this, is unbelievable. Bnei Het, Ephron, the worst guys around. They were barbarians. Who were they? They are considered keeping the Aseret 10 Commandments because they help Abraham acquire the Marat Machpelah, which is said they can give for free, and then they sold it. Aseret Dibrot. Rav Noach Weinberg, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, says, what do you learn from this midrash? What do you learn that the Bnei Het? To be slick. What did we learn from them? He writes as follows. Even though the Bnei Het, they were barbarians. And they were terrible. Yet for once they acted like decent human beings. They respected the Nasi Elokim, the Prince of Hashem. They showed respect to Abraham because they did this one act. It's as if they fulfilled the Aseret HaDibraot. Their one-time achievement made their life worth living. The Bnei Het did one good thing, and it's considered that did the 10 Commandments because that one good thing that they did was such an important thing. They sold the Marat Machpelah to Abraham Avinu. What Adam and Chava was, where Abraham Avinu is going to be buried, everyone's going to be buried, the holiest place.
They sold it for like a lot.
Yeah, right. But the fact that they did it, that already showed. Now, the truth is, Ephron and his people, did they think they were doing the most amazing thing in the world when they were doing that?
No, they were getting money.
And yet, the Torah says 10 times their name. Midrash says Aseret Dibraot. Because they helped the tzaddik, they did one good thing in their life that made their life worth living. It's as if they fulfilled the 10 Commandments. That through their one act. That's where Noah Weinberg learns it. This teaches us something very important. The people who change the course of history, who leave an impact, are not necessarily the ones who are well known. They're not the ones who are usually the movers and shakers. But each and every one of us has an opportunity to leave an imprint for eternity. The one good deed that we do can make all the difference in someone else's life. And you can be considered keeping the 10 Commandments by helping that one person through that one little deed. Before we start with the stories, Rav Twersky He says the same thing can be found by Rivka Imenu. What did Rivka do? That's it. She just gave water. Is that an earth-shattering deed? It's chesed, for sure. It's nice. But is it an earth-shattering deed? It's not. But it's not like, whoa. Okay, she helped. She helped. It's nice. Did she think she was going to change history that way? Did she go in saying, I'm going to do this great thing, so I'm going to become a mother in Klal Yisrael? She had no idea. Someone asked her. She gave it to her drink. And what happened? Klal Yisrael came out of that deed. You see, that one little deed, it's a great deed for sure. But it was one little mitzvah that she did, changed the course of history. She became Rivka Imenu. Klal Yisrael came out from her. Here in the Peninim al Torah, he shares a story from Rav Mendel Putrafas. We brought stories from Mendel Putrafas in the past. That he was traveling on a plane after he got out of communist Russia. And he sat on a plane. They were flying to Israel, to America, I don't remember exactly. And he was sitting next to someone who he thought was Jewish. But the guy obviously wasn't religious. And as Rav Mendel was praying on the plane with his tefillin, as he took up the tefillin, he turns to this guy who he thought may be Jewish and says to him, he can't even speak his language, so he points to him. And the man says, okay, shakes his head and he starts putting on tefillin. And from that one little act, this guy was Choseh b'Teshuvah. One little time putting tefillin on somebody. I saw a story they brought down from the Sdei Hamed of Chizkiah Medini, that in his town where he lived, there was a Jew who was making a lot of averot, bad stuff. And he got sick. And no one was going to Mivakar home. No one was going to visit him. The Sdei Hamed said, I'm going. People said, but he's a terrible guy. How can you go? And the Sdei Hamed said, listen, it's a mitzvah to go see the sick. I'm going. If you want to come, come. So a few people went with the rabbi. They went with the rabbi to visit this guy. This person made trouble for the Jewish people. And when they came there, this man broke down. He said, Rabbi, you came to visit me? You came to visit me and nobody? Someone will make trouble for you guys? He changed his life around from that one little deed. Going to Mivakar Cholim, he was Choseh b'Teshuvah. He returned to HaKadosh Baruch. I want to share with you one last story. This one is from Yechiel Spiro. He relates the story of a family in Bnei Brak. And they noticed that their son, Yossi, he was beginning to go off the derech.
Who was this?
A family in Bnei Brak. Their son Yossi started to go off the derech. He started going late to shul in the morning. Then he stopped going at all. And kashrut, he started to eat things the family wouldn't eat. And one thing led to the next. He even stopped keeping Shabbat completely. As Yossi was still living in his father's house and the parents were well-to-do, he goes to his father and he says, I would like for you to buy me a car. Or lease me a car, get me a car. The family had the money. The family didn't know what to do. He's already being Mahalal Shabbat. Imagine they give him a car. What's he going to do? He's going to drive it on Shabbat, go places, go to Tel Aviv, do whatever he wants there. So they decided, the father decided he was going to go ask the At Torah. He was going to go ask the Hazon Ish what to do. The Hazon Ish at this time was not well, but the man did his best to get in, and he met with the Hazon Ish. The Hazon Ish listened, the father said, my son is going off the derech, he's already not keeping this, not keeping that. And now he wants me to buy him a car. And the father said, I'm thinking of maybe to get it to him, but on condition that he can't drive it on Shabbat. What does the Hazon Ish say? The Hazon Ish tells the father, Absolutely not. When a father buys a car for his son, no strings or conditions should be attached to the gift. The father was expecting the Chazon Ish to take his side.
What do you say? Give it to
He said, give it to him without any strings attached. Don't tell him to keep Shabbat. Don't tell him anything. So, the father went and bought him a nice new car without any strings attached. And now came the first Shabbat. And the car was parked in the family driveway. But Yossi, who did not keep Shabbat anymore, didn't move the car. All Shabbat, he left the car in the driveway. For 4 weeks, he didn't move the car. And on the 5th week, all of a sudden, Yossi came to join the Shabbat Seudah in the family house. And then he came to another Seudah. And as the weeks went by, he started to go to shul on Shabbat. And slowly, he started keeping Shabbat again completely. After some time, the father said to Yossi, I don't understand. What happened? And Yossi says to his father, he says, when I asked you to buy me a car, I was certain you would tell me you would not give it to me unless conditioned I won't drive it on Shabbat. I decided if that would be the case, I wouldn't want your car, I would return and get my own car. Because if you can't accept me for who I am, then I don't want anything from you, you don't love me. But when you bought me the car and you didn't tell me anything about Shabbat, I realized how much you love me and how much you care for me. And I then asked myself, how can I drive the car on Shabbat when I know it's going to hurt my parents? When they love me so much, they gave it to me without any conditions. I decided not to drive out of respect for you. And after a few weeks of just not driving, I realized how special Shabbat was for me. And one thing led to the next, and he was Hoser B'Tshuva. This is the story of spiritual rings. But the idea here is, for us, one decision by the Gadol Hador. Chazon Ish said, don't tell him anything. Some people would say, the rabbi said it, I think I know what to say instead, and I'll go do it. That one little act, that one little deed, makes all the difference. Rabotai, let's quickly review the 3 lessons that we learned from this week's Parashat. The first idea that we brought down is the pasuk says that shidduchim, marriage, ma'ashem yatsa hadavar, comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which means that we have to know that we're playing the part in Hashem's plan, which means dealing with our spouse is considered avodat Hashem, service of God. And in what service are we supposed to do? Everything is created in Hashem's glory, in Hashem's kavod. That's how the marriage is supposed to be. Both of us looking objectively of how to honor Hashem. That was lesson number 1. Lesson number 2. That even though a person is going through a hard time, and even though the other person is a little bit of a troublemaker, a problematic person, yet the Nasi Elokim, a prince of God, keeps his cool at all times. Talks correctly. It's a big challenge. But that was Avraham Avinu. That's a lesson that we have to learn. And the third lesson that we learned is that helping a tzaddik in a business transaction is as if you keep Aseret HaDibraot. But more so, one act makes all the difference. Because of that one act, they were worthy for being who they were. That one act we have to think about. Every time we do something, we give someone water to drink. You don't have to say, now I'm become, the mother of Klal Yisrael. But you know that one action could make you the person who continues Klal Yisrael. So Rabotai, let's take these lessons to heart. Let's try to apply them. Let's think like Abraham Avinu had to keep her calm, like Rivka Imenu had to keep Hesed at all times. And if we apply that, this week especially in Parashat of Shidduchim, if we apply that to our marriages, God willing, our marriages will be blissful, will be great, will be amazing, would be what Hashem intended it to be. Ma Hashem yatzah hadavar. Shabbat shalom.